I used to do a lot of lecturing, a lot of teaching, not really teaching so much, not a day-to-day, but the end-of-term crits and things and presentations. And I used to be the external examiner. So it was more the sort of end-of-term when people have the big review. But I haven't done that for, well, 2 years like everybody else. No, it's great. Although I'd rather do architecture than talk about it. Talking's not the same as building, yes. Who do we think we are? Well, it's a deliberately ironic title because I think lots of architects forget who they are, or they have an inflated idea of who they are. I like to try and think about ourselves and our responsibility, and to be modest about what we do and realise it makes a big difference in people's lives. So we should think very carefully about what we're doing. So who do we think we are is a sort of questioning. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, for instance, we should be thinking about how our buildings might be treated in 50 years' time. So we've already talked a little bit about Park Hill, which was a building that was done in the 60s, and how it's gone in and out of fashion. Will our buildings go in and out of fashion, but will they be understood and misunderstood, which is more important? And also, so we're designing for people who aren't even born yet. Also, I think architects think that this thing about, they use the word placemaking, which I think is very dangerous because we don't make places, the people make the places, and actually most places are there already. So we should be careful to see the environment and the culture of where we are doing our buildings and listen very hard and try very hard to preserve the good things. We often say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So don't try to impose something, better to listen and respond and try and pick up the best things and amplify them. So I think it's those things I'd like to talk about. Also talk about a little bit about building at scale. Obviously quite a lot of what we do is now quite big. And do we feel good about that or bad about that? That has dangers, but it has advantages that if you can do that, you can make a big difference. And quite a lot of what we engage with is quite mainstream. And again, for us, that's important, not to do small, expensive, esoteric things, but try to do big housing schemes where we can make a lot of difference. So I think it's that sort of thinking about not whether we choose colour purple or yellow, or what sort of geometry we use, but more about the difference that architects make. And maybe Roger's going to talk a little bit about how we see the future for architects and how that's changing very quickly with technology and how we might deal with that and how we might, as a teams of people, and how we might work with constructors to do that better. Thank you everybody for coming, it's very strange talking to a screen. I like a bit of a titter, a bit of noise from the crowd. So I did find it rather strange. Yes, there you go. Yes. Yeah, that's it. My ego, I'm an architect, my ego needs massaging. So I'd really like to thank the IRIS group. Sorry, I'd call it Iris, of course, but the IRIS group, I'll try the pronunciation, and obviously the Plan magazine for organising the movie and this evening, and it's been great. We've had a really lovely time explaining. We're tidying up the bloody office as well, which has been a wonderful event in itself for them to come and film this. So anyway, without further ado, so I'll start to talk to the slides. Whoops, slightly funny acoustics. So I've set myself some odd slides at the beginning here to force me. For architects, it's always rather easy to flick through the images and say, we did this, that's purple, this is green, that's a bit tall, this lines up with the building next door. What I was trying to force myself to do, and hopefully Roger will do too, is talk a little bit more about how we do it or why we do it. And so the first title is, who do we think we are? And I think it's a deliberately ironic title because I think architects need to remember the power they have or the responsibility they have. And I think sometimes they can be quite obsessed with form, and obviously our heroes and the people we go to see give us ideas which are often very visual. But I do think we have a real responsibility that what we do does change lives. It's a political act, being an architect. And I think we have to look at it, you know, have to be very self-aware without trying to be arrogant, but actually thinking very hard about how these responsibilities are. Next slide, please. Oh, do I do the next slide? There you go. Oh, is it coming? No, not working. Hey. Oh, there we are. Oh, I'm going to get to it now. It's gone. So this is us in front of a Cool House building. I love this photograph. So I'm the fat one, and they turn me sideways so you can see my belly. And Roger's the thin one, and he's straight on. And if he turned sideways, he'd almost disappear. So I should have got this one sorted. So I think, whoop, I've got a new one that works. Very good. I think it's just to say that we love the atmosphere of architecture and the culture of architecture. And I think what I'm going to talk about a little bit, or try to, is about being mainstream. And, you know, that's not my taste in music or art, but I think it's about engaging very much with where you can make big change. And I think that's really important to us, that it's all very well doing one-off beautiful houses, but actually what if you could do 20 homes or 500 homes? Wouldn't that make more difference? And I do think I really worry. I went to see the Lloyd's building and I love it and it's fantastic, but the amount of effort that the Richard Rogers practice, the genius they put into that one building, I feel like it could have redesigned the whole of Northern England. And so sometimes that we should be careful, maybe spreading it out a bit might be a good idea. And this thing about trying to think about how we use our effort and using it maybe in a sustainable or an efficient way. The next slide, please.
Shall I do it for you?
Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah, God. Yeah, I'm not really allowed IT. I've got a felt tip pen and I'm backwards and forwards is all I can do. So this is a lovely slide. It's in a building, it's in a square. We go Gillette Square, which is around the corner from where I used to live, and we've done a series of buildings. But the message here really is we should remember that our buildings, it's what are people going to think of the buildings in 40 or 50 years? You know, we're designing buildings that are for people that aren't even born yet. So we need to try and extend our minds as broadly as we can to what we're doing and really try and listen very hard and think very hard about what we do. So that, you know, how will these people judge us? Next slide, please. And I think this is Park Hill, which you saw in the movie. We always use this slide because it's a sort of sense of humour that after all this wonderful architecture, and it's a great building already, and I think we've reinvigorated it, but actually we love the fact that you still have the ice cream van, and where our colour is all very carefully selected and sort of modernist, but we love the pink on the ice cream van. So there's this sort of, no matter how austere and serious we think we are, there's always humour. But it's just to talk about a building. So when it was first built, as you saw in the movie, I think it was a wonderful building. It was popular, but then it changed and taste went again the brutalist architecture, and Prince Charles said some stupid things, and that basically people rejected the building and it was empty for a long time. And then we looked at how we'd bring it back to life. But actually we realised that there was a wonderful generosity and a confidence about the original building, and that's what we should bring to the building. We were talking about the sort of spirit of the building. So bringing that generosity and the confidence and the spirit without being domineering and being sort of open-handed in a modern way. And I think that's another interesting aspect to what we do. Next slide, please. Well done, Rog. So what we try to talk about and what we think, there's an awful thing about, people use this word placemaking now. Well, we don't make places, architects don't make places. They were there before. And when they're changed, it's the people that make them, it's the activity that makes the place. It's not architects. And so we try to explain that we want buildings that tell stories about people. We want our buildings to be about people. We don't want people to talk about our buildings. We want them to enjoy them and to feel good about living in them. Next slide. And I think there's just a couple more, having forced me to talk a bit more generally. And it's bloody hard work. Actually getting a building, one of the things we say is that a drawing is not a building. Talking about it or even lecturing isn't a building. You have to see it and build it. Architecture has to be built. You have to go through those compromises. And we're very proud that we build as much of our buildings as we can, or we have some role to the end of the building. And that takes a lot of compromise and a lot of hard work. But it's important to do that, and then that learning folds back into the next building. Next slide, please. So this is a quote from Steve Jobs, which I came across. I actually particularly like this quote. We don't get a chance to do that many things, and all of them should be really excellent. You really have to think, well, you've heard in these projects, Crossrail's nearly 30 years? No, 28, how old's Harry?
29 and a half years.
29 and a half years, sorry. Roger's son was born on the day we did the interview, so it's easy to remember. But there was, we're talking about 8 years, 10 years. Well, if you're going to work on a project, you have to really keep at it. You don't want to make a mistake early, because then you're stuck with it for years. It's hard work. And I like the fact that Steve Jobs reminds us that we're all going to die. So that's quite useful. We are mortal and therefore prize the time. So it's better do it well. It better be good. There you go. Roger's moving me on. That's why he's got it. So I think this thing about mainstreaming, we have this discussion where some buildings, like a beautiful museum building, a project for the Victoria and Albert Museum or the Henry Moore Museum, they're going to be good anyway, or they might even be great anyway. So almost the architect is taking it from an 8 out of 10 to maybe a 9. Nothing ever gets to 10. But some of the times we're confronted with projects that are a 3 or a 2. And if other architects don't really bother about them and they're not very good architects, then they'll stay that way. But we can take it from a 2 or a 3 to a 7 or maybe nearly an 8. And I think that chance of making a really big difference and spreading, if we put the hard work in and making a lot of difference. Next slide. So I think this is really about Crossrail and Tottenham Court Road. It's taken a long time, but it's just amazing the difference that Harbinder and Roger talked about. I mean, the art, it is the most seen art in the whole of London. In fairness, it's the most popular art gallery in London with all the artists on the Crossrail. So it's a really mainstream thing, but it makes a massive difference to people's lives. Next slide, Uncle Rog. So then I'm going to talk about 3 projects quite quickly at this rate, because I'm running out of time and Roger will move me on. This is UCLan. It's quite interesting just to show the process. So this is the competition. I hope you can all see it. It's fine and big here. You might have to peer on your screens. I like the idea. We're obviously competitor D. So I think Roger said we're one of 4 or 5. This is an R&D competition. So this is our competition vision, and then I'll show you what we built. And it was all about this route through the building and obviously really linking it back to the city. Sorry, I should expand. UCLan is university. It's up in Preston. It's University of Central Lancashire. And so it's basically a student union, or what we would now call a student centre. But what it did, and here it is built, is we helped create this massive new square in front of it and actually sort out the motorways and the driving round it. So actually it's traffic calmed, but also there's a route through back here. The other thing is Roger claims to have personally saved the pub, the Adelphi, and this is now called the Adelphi Square. So if you go for a beer in here, Roger saved the building, otherwise it's going to get knocked down. Next slide. And just the sort of quality. So it's a big, quite a simple building, but actually it's beautifully done. The glass is fritted, and you can see that. And also there's the quality of landscape, and it's really well done. And this is up in Preston, and it's become quite a unique place. It's called the Preston Effect, or the Preston Approach, where the local authority really tried to invest in themselves. They didn't go to big business. They literally tried to employ local people in any way they can and fold all their money back into their economy. And actually, over the last, I think it's nearly 8-10 years, it's become quite famous, even sort of in Europe, as this example of self-help. And this is all part of it. And then here it is built, and there's the route. So in the competition, we talked about the route, and it's echoed in the ceiling lighting, linking up from the church down through to this new place. Good evening. Hi, nice to see you. Next, and then next slide. And then inside, it's really think about, it's slowly filling with students. They're still working a lot on digital screens. But again, we work a lot with interiors. We have an interiors department. And as you can see, always bringing in colour, but actually thinking about how it's used and thinking about the user and how also there's a sort of change. Student unions used to be a bar and a bit noisy, but about people learning and people working together in these spaces. Next slide, please. There you go. And I think that's one of us posing. And then bringing art in, always trying to bring art in and decoration. And just, actually, that's all, I think they're all of us. Okay, next slide. So this is not particularly a serious slide, but it's meant to be about changing lives. I'm going to talk about iron dry, as we call it. Next slide. So this is a sort of process where I just thought it was interesting just to try. This is the public display we made to try and explain this to local people, to fundraisers, to the local planning officers, and to the neighbours about what was happening here. So this is the new Centre of Excellence for Dementia. Next slide. So we actually explained to everybody what the issues with dementia are and about how serious it was becoming and is a real issue for the future. And here's the thing I was trying to explain about bench to bedside, this link about having scientists and people coming in for daycare very close together. So we're actually explaining the science to the people who are going to be neighbours to this. Next slide. The other thing that was very interesting is it's part, this is the site here, but it's part of all these things like there's major buildings of universities and hospital and medical research all the way around the sort of building, like the British Library. So it's known as the Knowledge Quarter. So it's not just the building itself, but it's part of this network of clever people, students and people exchanging information. Next slide. And then, so this is then, so actually it's a Royal Free Hospital. We kept the front of it and not the back down, which is very contentious. It's a listed building. We've built a new wing in the back, and this is the Eastman Dental Clinic, which has been kept. So there's a new building, which is going to be part residential and part students, the very research building, and then this is just being refurbished more as a general teaching. So very much a sort of mixed use. Next slide. And then, oh, sorry, that's digitized. But basically, it was just to explain that we've got this public space. Here we are on site, lots of men with trowels. Anyway, it's getting built, that's the point, and the old building's been saved and repurposed. Next couple of slides. Here it is. Just the image you've seen before, but this is the old, actually extended and brought back into use and then very carefully linked and almost setting the sort of tone. This is the new building and then the new roof and a bit of science poking up in the sky. Next slide. And that's, so they've thought quite a lot about how, and essentially, as Ewan explained in the movie, it's just a big box, but how can we make this sit in the city and how can it approach, how can it talk to the other buildings around it, and how can it start to control, start to have long views, but actually control the solar gain. And almost this is an early sketch, and here is it moving on, and now it's on site. Next slide. And that's just again how one of the things we did is about this link through and about, as I explained in the movie, it was a completely closed site, but we've actually got new pedestrian links, a new square and a route onto the other side. So local people, actually it's linked to quite a popular cycle route as well. And this is them coming through. So rather than signs being closed away between a wall, now people can walk and come round the building and see what's happening all through the building and the science going on and the study into dementia. So it's about this making connections all the time. And then the last one from me. So this is serious about society, human about architecture, always trying to find something exciting but a bit of fun and trying to bring these together. Next slide, please. So this is East Village, which again we talked a little bit about. So I was trying to explain what we brought to this. There was a master plan that had 2 towers. they were sit separately. There was 4 buildings. And what we wanted to do was bring everybody together. This is a build to rent, so it's going to be a rental, but we looked on it as a community. And so we connected the towers, but we connected them halfway up, because that way everybody in either tower can pop down to see their friends. And the whole thing about it is making it all work together. The top of buildings and the bottom buildings are always interesting, but actually we managed to make the middle interesting in this building, so that you don't have second-class citizens. You've got good stuff everywhere, connections to the amenities and out onto the roof gardens in the middle, the top with the views, and the bottom with the connection to the streets. And again, this is mixing uses, build to rent. So this has got workspace and a series of restaurants and hobby rooms. And then, as ever, we've been really fascinated by colour. And so the rest of the East Village, it's the old Olympic Village, is actually quite magnolia. It's quite boring. It was built very quickly and everybody's a bit scared of colour. So we decided we'd be the most colourful building we could. And it opens out onto the Queen Elizabeth Park. So there's all these wonderful flowers. And so we thought about towards the city and back towards Stratford Station and the sort of nighttime economy, it's red and pink. And then as it moves towards to the park, the shades of green and blue. And we studied this and used new technology to design the elevations. Last couple of slides for me. So there you go. I love this image because it's sort of like a constable paint. It looks like the Haywain or something. So it's this very modern building painted in a rather, maybe a bit facetious, sort of neo-romantic way, but actually it's sitting in this wonderful wild park. And this is the colour chiming with the pink on the trees. Last couple of slides for me. And this is how we test it. So literally we got the colours, we made them and dropped them in. This is the grey frame, and we dropped the different colours in. And this is us explaining to people how it's going to work and the difference. So the 2 towers have a slightly different feel, and they're linked. Last couple of slides. And that's how we talked about it and how people would, very urban living. Some people seem to be having an argument, some people seem to be snogging. Next slide. And this is it built. I mean, one of the things we could talk for hours, this has been very prefabricated. So everything on this is built off site, brought down on trucks and bolted together on site all the way, all the bathroom pods, all the kitchens, all the glazing and actually the structural. And it's been put together in a really scientific way. And it's been an amazing process to be part of. Next one I think we'll see. So literally these big sections of floor and wall come down on the truck from Thetford. They actually travel down the M11, which is very exciting. So you get these bits of colour sort of flying down the motorway, and they're assembled. And you can see it's pretty brush colour. It's really shiny. And again, by having it glazed in front, you get that sparkle. Last couple of slides. And then we've done the interiors too. And again, trying to bring the colour in and thinking about how people might enjoy the building. This is what it's going to be like in the link. Last slide from me. And then just back to the gift. So what I think you'll be seeing is that in all these projects, the colour or the new links or the new connections, we're giving it to the project. They're on top of the brief. It's always a sort of kindness and a generosity. And this is the gift. And here's back to Crossrail and Tottenham Court Road, and the gift is the art. There you go. Have you got anything left to say after all that? Over to Roger.
Only that you're a very hard act to follow, Russell. I mean, what we tried to do in this talk is just reflect on 1 or 2 things about our work. And I think what we're seeing is increasingly projects are more complicated, mixed use. So we talk about our office being this melting pot where everybody has a voice, but I think that's also reflected in the mixed use and the complexity of buildings that we're involved with. And this project, which was here east, was mentioned in the film. In the Olympics, it was the broadcast and the press centre. It was 1 million square foot of space that in legacy after the games nobody really knew what to do with. There's talk of demolition, and as Nick said in the film, we were involved in evolving the design for this, and I think the client here, Delancey, should be applauded in that they encouraged a whole mix of different uses to come together. So quite an early sketch here suggests how this big and small business working together in startup and creative business in the Innovation Centre. 2 universities, the V&A have moved in with their collections. So it's an incredible mix of users coming together. Our role in the beginning was to identify how the space could be used better. You know, I said it was 1 million square foot of space that no one knew what to do with. What we proposed was another 100,000 square foot of space, which was quite aggressive. We proposed putting these mezzanines in, which created new and additional space. The yard between the two buildings is now this sort of melting pot between different users, really quite a successful space. Canal side over the River Lee gets the benefit of afternoon sun. But I remember the arguments we had here. You know, our input, this is an existing building, so we said, well, where's the architecture here, Roger? What did you do? Well, what we did was bring the new uses into the ground floor, which is the bars and the restaurants, and they all needed a kitchen extract. So those yellow flues at the higher level with a kitchen extract. And we had to fight tooth and nail to get those added to the elevation because the M&E engineers wanted to just knock some holes and bring them through the floor slab. And I think that sort of intervention and understanding how you could deal with fire-rated flues from kitchens going up through commercial office space, making it more complicated was part of our role here. And then the gantry, which during the games was where the air handling equipment was housed for these 30 broadcast studios. In Legacy, that gantry was going to be demolished. And we said, well, why? You know, why are you demolishing this free space? Let's put some artist studios there. And this was an early sketch, and I think you've seen this now in the film. There are 30 different artist studios, all on affordable rent. Really quite creative individual spaces that have been taken over, managed by the Trampery. Each space is different. We work very closely with Architecture 00 and developing their system of using plywood so they could all be lightweight and erected on site. Then within the main building we have these different entrances and reception areas trying to create different environments. So this one is Timber Yard. I think the previous one is, I'm just trying to look at it there, it looks like a metal factory, so all different character areas. This is robotics studio from the UCL who moved in there. So I think what I'm really explaining in Here East is this complexity and the whole variety of users, making really an innovation district in one building. I'm not sure if my battery's run out. Can someone move that on? So I think, oh, it's going too fast now. Tiger Way is a project which is mentioned in the film also, but I think the complexity and the mixed use is quite important to understand. Here we're building 80 apartments above a school. And this has been done previously, and we went to see some examples where house builders have built schools, but they're all on a 5-metre grid, and it meant you got columns in the middle of a classroom because no one had really worked it out. And I think what we were demonstrating is that by thinking very carefully about how, that's not working, next slide, how can you move on the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. And the next one, you know, we're starting to look at how the classrooms function properly. We're designing it as a school, and we're creating lots of outside space. Next slide, please. So we're respecting the children. We're playing that game on schools that normally have boys and girls entrances. Well, this is one entrance for high flyers, you know, respecting the children. So the next slide shows that they've got, am I getting a new box? Brilliant, thank you so much. Thank you. So we've got space for the children to play, and inside proper school. Now what was achieved here, our client was the educational authority. They hadn't built homes before. They needed to build a school. They hadn't got any funding. But by us developing a brief for them, building 80 apartments, that paid for the school. And it paid for a better school than they would have been able to get otherwise, where we really respected the children and created sports halls like this with climbing walls. Very few schools have this level of facility, all provided free because we put the housing above. And then this is the housing entrance. I think clean, modern forms, you know, respecting the quality of the housing that's needed. Lovely flats, good daylight, great views. People want to live in these towers overlooking the park. So here's a very successful project we created really out of nothing by looking at that complexity of mixing the use of residential and of a school and having knowledge of both of those sectors. And I think our work has also been very focused on society. You know, we've always wanted to create stronger communities. And an example of that was a competition we won a few years ago in Corby. They wanted a new town hall, and we won a competition to design the Corby Cube. People say, Roger, it's not a cube because it's a bit squashed, isn't it? And I say, well, there's 2 stories of basement, so it actually is a cube. But a lot of the accommodation needed to be on the ground floor, and we developed this, this narrative of using a ramp to circulate around the building, which is the library. And so everything is accessible off this ramp, meaning that we could accommodate everyone step-free access. The council chamber at higher level is accessed from the library, as is the theatre. This is the theatre where we took the office and we put on our own show. Everyone's wearing a face mask. And then in the evening, from the bus stop, you can look up and see the councillors in the council chamber working away. So we'd always had that at the back of our mind. And Plumstead Library, which was mentioned in the film, is an extension of that thinking. You know, I think you can talk about it in architectural terms, in terms of these solid brick forms reflecting the Edwardian frontage, you know, how we work with brick in a confident way. But I'm more interested in how it works internally. This works for people of all ages. It's great for the kids coming in, for old people. It's not just a library, it's a job centre. It's a sports facilities. People here are setting up business, and there's support there from the local authority, helping them, encourage them to set up their businesses. The schools locally, which can't afford to build the halls, but actually can come and use the halls here in the library. So again, it's become a focus of the community, and I think it's our architecture and it's talking to local people that made all this happen in the outset. And I think, you know, we're always focusing on the human scale. We have this rule in our office that we only ever show photographs of our projects with humans in it. So that last one there, pictures of kids. It's very difficult to get pictures of kids because you're told you can't use them, yeah? So we generally manage to get the kids moving, and they're then slightly blurred, and the teacher's the only person you can recognise. But we focus on our human scale, and Crossrail's been mentioned in the film, and Harbinder talked about that. And that's an example, I think, where a big engineering project has been humanised, where we're looking at the experience of walking through the station. And more recently, we've been working on the Thames Tideway, which is this new super sewer running through London. And our job has been very similar, actually, as to Crossrail. It's an engineering-led project. We have to understand all the engineering requirements, but our job is to how is that then humanised at street level, at the public realm. We've got to create these massive manhole covers. So this is the one in Chelsea, where we had to look at forms that were curved, alluvial forms, if you like, from the river, understanding how the tide's going to work so we could bring in planting at different levels. And this is an example where we're able to work with the local authority and really minimise what would have been a very formal square design. Whereas when we went next door into Westminster, we were told we couldn't change a thing, and this is much more of a square form sticking out into the river, very formal forms. We're using the same lighting, the same balustrading, so there's a sort of family of materials, but really quite a different form. And then Blackfriars, where the film started, is going to be this whole new terrace. It's 200 metres long, it projects out into the river, 30 metres. It's going to create more public realm than the Garden Bridge would have done on a south-facing terrace, where you're going to get this great view. You can look towards the Houses of Parliament, you can look towards Tower Bridge, or you can look back towards St Paul's. This wonderful new space that we are creating, working in this case with an artist, Nathan Coley, developing these black stages. And just to prove, my final slide is that we always break the rules. So here's a favourite photograph of ours with no people in it whatsoever. But we like the human scale of the flamingo. Thank you.
Thank you very much.